you, Alan. First of all, Loren, let me welcome you and thank you for speaking to us here at Life Stories Worldwide. What an honest story you just told us. I have to say, very, very honest. We've listened to a lot of life stories, but I think yours has been the most honest that we've had on here so far. Now, you grew up in a small town, single mom. You said you lived on potatoes and soup. How hard was that for you?
There was a moment when we knew my stepdad was gone and that we were going to get a quote unquote insurance settlement. We were going to move to a new house. Mom was buying the house straight out so we could never lose it. She was buying 2 new cars. It was all going to be wonderful. And I had this vision in my head that we would get there and have chocolate chip cookies and milk every day after I came home from school. I can tell you in the 12 years that we lived in that house, I don't remember one time that we gathered in that way. I remember a lot of turmoil. I remember a lot of drama. I remember a lot of fights and even drunken parties. I don't remember chocolate chip cookies and milk after school. I do remember taking what I earned from my own job at 13 and going to buy my own lunch every day after school.
So you had to grow up very, very fast then by the sound of it.
Yeah, I was told by my uncles that I was, quote unquote, the man of the house just before my 13th birthday. And it was a hard revelation because I didn't have any idea what a man was or was supposed to be.
And at that particular time, did you have any ambitions? I mean, did you want to be anything like, I know you joined the Air Force, but did you have any ambitions of what you wanted to work at that time?
I had no vision for my life at all. None whatsoever. I think it was right after I read those 3 books that I first began to say, in fact, I remember telling the Air Force counselor when I got out, I want to grow up and be the next James Dobson. And she looked at me like I had 4 heads and said, I don't know who this James Dobson is. What does he do? Who is he? I said, okay, I want to travel around the world writing books and speaking to people to help save families. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, have you ever written anything? So I gave her a piece that I'd written. She read it, put it down, and walked out of the room. I was like, is that good? Is that bad? I mean, she going to get somebody to tell me what I'm supposed to do with my life when I got out of the Air Force? And she came back and all of her makeup was gone. And I'm like, okay. She said, so I don't know what you want me to do for you here. And I said, well, you're my education counselor. How am I going to spend my GI Bill? Do I get a degree in journalism or English or psychology or what do I do? And she said, I don't know what to tell you. And I said, well, what did you think of what I wrote? She said, I don't believe you wrote it. I mean, maybe you got that from this James Dobson character, but there's no way that a 21-year-old man wrote that piece. Mm-hmm. It takes years of being a counselor or a therapist or a pastor to understand the concepts that you've written in there. There's no way that was you. I said, no, it was me, beginning to end. She said, well, then you're going to have a couple of problems. Nobody's going to believe that you think like that until your hair's falling out or it's turning gray. I'm almost there.
I'm just falling out.
Almost there. They'll believe I'm wise soon.
Now, you said, of course, your school wasn't great. You were molested. You were doing drugs. Were you on first name terms with the cops?
I never did drugs. Those were the 2 things that I was spared from. Alcohol, I never had a taste for. I took a Black Label bottle of Jack Daniels, a big half gallon, and I turned it up and drank about half of it. I didn't get a buzz. I didn't get drunk. Didn't even burn my throat. It was like bad iced tea. And I handed it to my friend who was standing there with me at the time. And I said, I'll either be broke or dead before I enjoy this. I have never been intoxicated in my life.
Wow.
If you took a 1-gallon alcohol bottle, you could put all of the contents of alcohol I have consumed since birth in 1 bottle.
Wow.
Drugs, just never got into them. I saw him destroy my uncle's life. I saw him destroy a lot of people around me. I never got into drugs. My drug was pride and sex. And those 2 got destroyed me the best you could imagine.
Now, you said at 9 years of age, you used to enjoy going to church because you got a nice lunch. But
yes,
you were asked the question if you wanted a really good friend. Was that the moment you actually accepted Jesus into your life? Or was there something happening?
First time, yeah.
Yeah, first time.
Yeah, that was the first time I said, I want Jesus to be my Lord and Savior. I didn't get it. Mm-hmm. I listened to a preacher friend not too long ago say there's a thing called a gestation period. Mm-hmm. There's a moment when the seed is planted and the baby begins to be born, but every creature has a different life cycle. Elephants take 22 months. Rabbits take 8 weeks. Carrots take 18 weeks. So it just depends on the seed and the plant and the harvest and how well it's nurtured as to how long it takes that birthed seed to come to life. And for me, that was almost 20 years, sad to say.
Okay. So you enjoyed the lunch, but let's get to the girls in your life. You didn't have a very good success with girls.
I had 4 or 5 long-term relationships, and I broke all but one of those, and the rest of them were minutes.
Okay. I was just wanted to talk about your high school sweetheart when you phoned her, and she said, "Who is this?" How did that actually make you feel? I know you said you were suicidal afterwards, but at the time, was it a shock?
It was a shock. It was disbelief. It was anger. Here's the irony. All of the 3 women that I mentioned, that high school sweetheart, the one I fell in love with before I went to basic training, and the one that I was engaged to when we broke it off, my wife has met all 3 of them.
Wow.
All 3 of them are in the kingdom. All 3 of them are serving God. One of them is married to a pastor in Eastern Oklahoma. One of them is married and living in the oil fields in West Texas. And the other one, I'm not sure exactly what she does, but she was the first one. She got a hold of my first book somehow. And when she read that story, she sent me a long Facebook message and said, "It breaks my heart to know that I nearly ended your life." That wasn't my intent. It was just to end our relationship. But
Life Stories. Life Stories Worldwide is brought to you every Monday night at 8 p.m. UK time. We broadcast live on Facebook, Zoom and YouTube. So why not join us every Monday night at 8 p.m. UK time.
This year is 30 years she's been married to the man she left me for.
Wow.
So I'm excited and proud for her. And I see her pictures on Facebook all the time, and I just praise God for her.
You mentioned your first book there. What was your first book called? How to Influence Girls in Money's Lesson?
How to Screw Up Any Relationship in 5 minutes or less. I should write that one because I got that nailed. No, my first book was called Live a More Excellent Life. And the book is 13 stories, just like the ones that I've told you today, and the lessons that I learned along in that process. I call it the book for people who are starting out and starting over, because I talk about vision. You asked if I had a vision for my life. I really didn't have a clue, but I do know that I remember walking in while I was still in the Air Force and finding my mother scrubbing the urinals in our middle school. And I said, "Mom, let's go to dinner." And she's like, I got to finish this bathroom in the West Wing, and then we can go. And I said, "Well, why are you doing this?" And she said, "Well, this is my job." I said, "I know it's your job, but why is this your job?" And she looked at me kind of angry, and she said, "You know, I dropped out of high school. This is the best I'll ever do." And I said, "No, Mom, I just got my first promotion in the Air Force, and my sister was valedictorian from high school. She's in the top of her class at Baylor University. There's no way we come from this kind of stock that a janitor is the best you'll ever do." Well, that really ticked her off. The Air Force sent me to Honduras, and while I was there, I got a call from my aunt. She said, "Your mom was really upset about that story." Now, let me tell you something. In all of my life, this is the only phone call I ever got at work from my aunt to tell me that my mother was really upset about that conversation. And I'm waiting for her to tell me, "Your mom is stressed out. She's had a heart attack. She's in the hospital, and I'm 2,000 miles away. There's nothing I can do about it." But what she said was, we talked about it. We decided to go back and get our GEDs. And I was like, "Yes, she's finally going to get her GED." And she said, "But Mr. Barton wouldn't let her have her GED." I'm like, "What do you mean he wouldn't let her have it?" She said, "Well, her scores were so high, they told her that if you'll just hold on a little bit longer, we can get your high school diploma."
Wow.
And then Mr. Barton came back and said, "Get your diploma. And if you'll go get your degree in education, I'll convince the school district to bridge all the years you've served as a janitor towards your teacher retirement." And she retired at 65 years old after teaching for almost 20 years. Her specialty, those kids that had given up on school, either they'd been kicked out for truancy or drugs or discipline problems, and they would come back to the Challenger High School and she would help them graduate. One of those girls was a drug addict, got pregnant. Parents ended up splitting up. One's in jail, one is dead. And the little girl comes back at 17 with a baby in tow and says, I want to graduate. And they said, we wrote you off 2 years ago. She said, but I'm not 18 and I want to graduate. And they're like, we don't have a place for you. My mother said, I got plenty of room. I got a giant room. You can put a bassinet in the corner, but let that baby graduate. She's the director of nursing in Georgetown.
Wow.
So for what I have for a vision to write books and influence lives, story power is the primary way that I do that. And I help people realize whether it's the story, I dropped out of school, this is the best I'll ever do. Or I'm fat and unlovable and nobody's going to want me. Or I've screwed up so many times, everybody's going to give up on me. That story will destroy you. But I can help you rewrite that story and give you the power to transform other people's lives.
Well, to quote yourself, that's influence definitely is leadership from what you did for your mother there, how the conversation completely turned her life around and what she's done after. So yeah, well done, that man. Now let's talk about the Air Force. He said, how old were you when you went to the Air Force?
I went in at 20 and I came out just before I was 25.
You said you hated
went in 88 and came out in 93.
You said you absolutely hated it. What was wrong with it?
Oh, no, I love the Air Force. The only thing that I didn't like about the Air Force, I was a firefighter, but on active duty, the only fire I ever fought was one that we set. So there wasn't a whole lot of action in that, but there was a whole lot of training and a whole lot of education and a chance to travel around the world. But when I got out was when policies began to change and the don't ask, don't tell policy was removed. And it was right after Desert Storm and just before the rest of the world started falling apart, so to speak, in the early 90s.
Okay, well, and you said, of course, at that particular time you became addicted to pornography. How did that start?
You know, the really sad part is it's hard even to say that it was just pornography, because when I was introduced at 9 years old to sexuality, there's no way my brain could comprehend that. I know enough now from the studies and research that I've done, but I can also tell you from my own experience, the rush of endorphins and the chemical responses in the brain and in the body, it was like chocolate. It was like coffee to a 2-year-old. There is no cognitive ability to process what that sense of emotion and the chemistry in your body is doing. And so for me, it was just the high. It was counter to the stress of my stepfather being gone and nobody being around and having no men in my life who could anchor me and tell me right from wrong and not being exposed. And I found people who would engage in activity that made me feel like something else. It was euphoric. And so sexuality became my go-to. I discovered pornography for the very first time at about 5, completely forgot about it until I was 9 and that experience happened. But after that, it was, I didn't care how I got it as long as I got that sexual release. That release was my addiction.
You said at times, of course, even you fell back at several times. You said, but how did you deal with that, finally deal with it, or has it been dealt with finally?
You know, my third book is called The 5 Battle Strategies of a Victorious Warrior. And I realized after a lot of conversations, a lot of research, a lot of therapy, that the word repentance really means to simply change your mind. It means a new mindset. And when I realized exactly what that meant, that it wasn't about behavioral modification, it was about changing what you focus your mind on.
Life Stories. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Life Stories at Lunch, where you can see and hear many more life stories. Don't forget to click the bell so we can notify you when we are live on YouTube.
Set your mind on things above, not on things below. Think on these things which are holy and true and pure and just and praiseworthy. And when I began to take my mind off of the fix, how am I going to get that next fix? Will it be the next girl? Will it be a magazine or a website? When I began to take those things out of my mind and not let them obsess about my mind, I remember Rush Limbaugh saying, when somebody asked him, how did you lose so much weight? This was before he realized he had cancer. But they said, how did you lose so much weight? He said, I used to sit here behind this microphone and think for hours about how I was going to prepare dinner tonight. What would I cook? What would be the side items? What would be for dessert? He said, I spent so much time thinking on it. I promise I gained weight just thinking about eating. And I thought that's such a strange phrase. But when you understand what metanoia means, you realize that the biochemistry of the body responds to the thought process. Mm-hmm. Sometimes before anything actually happens. He said, when I hired a chef and I alleviated from my daily mental process thinking about cooking and eating, I literally show up at the table, I put nutrients in my body, and I go on with my day. And all of my thinking about food takes as long as it takes for the fork to get to my face. And I thought, even in my marriage, when those moments are there, I want to relish that moment, but I don't need to dwell on that moment for hours before or days after. Relish the moment while it's happening and move on with your life. See, an addict can't do that, whether it's drugs or alcohol or sex or violence or anger or work. They never turn their mind off of the thing they're not supposed to be thinking about and pointing their mind toward the thing they're supposed to be thinking about. So in my book, 5 Battle Strategies of a Victorious Warrior, that's exactly what I coach people to do. First, you've got to identify what it is that's just obsessing your mind. Then you've got to agree. Come now, let us reason with me. And you've got to be willing to say, okay, you're right. That's not just a bad idea. That's sin. I'm a master. I'm a slave. That's the master. And I got to break this. And then you change your mind and you focus on something else. And every time that thought pops in, take that thought captive, beat it into submission, and replace that with a new thought. And then you've got to choose to not remember how good sin was. I had a guy right here in the studio in an interview not too long ago, an NFL player, not Mike Kissel, a guy by the name of Mondo Davis. And Mondo said, look, if you're sinning and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. And that's kind of the challenge, because most of us who lived that way for so long, we got really good at sinning and it was really fun. You've got to choose to forget how fun it was so that you can focus on what's driving you to the next thing. And that's why a vision for your life is so important. If you know where you're going, all those other highways are irrelevant.
I've heard that said before. You have to remember to forget. Was the one I was told previously.
Yes.
Now, you said a lot of times that you screwed up quite a lot, made a lot of bad decisions. How on earth do you pick yourself up each time and keep going on?
Just enough hope to believe that getting up again is worth it. I just have to, like the toddler, I just have to know. I was watching a little guy last night, probably wasn't 18 months old, running through the park. He came down off the grass and landed in that, on the edge of the gravel where the parking lot was uneven. And you could see it coming from a mile away. One of those little steps isn't going to go out far enough, and he's going to face plant right in that gravel. And as much as all of us as parents look at that and go, ooh, that's going to hurt, he's going to cry. His learning experience includes, when you change surfaces like that, slow down a little bit. But in the end, you can't lay there in the parking lot and cry just because your face is bleeding. Get up, move on with your life. And as parents, I say it to people all the time when their kids fall and I see them yank them up by their arm. I look at them and say, aren't you glad we learned to walk when we're that close to the ground to start with? Because falling is, well, it's imminent. Getting up is a choice. But I'm so glad that we learn to fall and get up early so that we can make that the habit in life, not falling down and staying down.
Can you learn to fall gracefully?
Well, if you're Buzz Lightyear, you can. You can fall with style and call it flying. Some of us falling gracefully includes having people around us who let us down easy, so to speak. They see the fall coming and they kind of buffer the blow that they can. But I'll be honest and tell you the lessons that I've learned, most of them came from falling really hard. On your face by really the sound hard. Of it as well. Can you tell from my face?
No, not really. Now, you said, of course, you grew up, you're a single mom. I like what you said, single moms can't dad. How important is a dad in a family?
A dad is eminently qualified to raise a son. A dad is also absolutely essential in raising a daughter. I have 2 of each, 2 daughters and 2 sons. My girls are older, my boys are younger. And the relationship that I have and how drastically different it is with each of them is amazing to me. When I see parents, whether mothers or fathers, try to raise all of their children exactly the same, I mean, it's imperative that we have core values, that we know this is what our family believes, lives for. These are the things that we will never violate. But we also have to realize that one of the ladies I had in the studio last week is she works with Down syndrome kids to help them find gainful employment. And I said, I remember Zig Ziglar talking about fish training school. Dale Carnegie talked about it too. He said, when we try to take all of the squirrels to fish training school, all the squirrels fail. And when we take the fish to squirrel training school, all the fish fail because they're not made to do that. And when a mom tries to raise her son to be more effeminate, she's failing his nature. And he will fail at being an effeminate son, or he'll become someone that he's not in order to meet her expectations.
Life Stories Worldwide is brought to you every Monday night at 8 p.m. UK time. We broadcast live on Facebook, Zoom and YouTube. So why not join us every Monday night at 8 p.m. UK time.